Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest edition of the World Report television show. I'm Scott Crowfoot. On today's show, is the Syrian civil war spreading beyond its borders? Guess who's heading the UN nuclear arms talks? Iran. The NASDAQ 100 breaks the 3,000 mark for the first time in 12 years as foreign U.S. Treasury debt hits a record $5.76 trillion. Our history segment explores the conservative leaders of the 1980s. And now to our top stories. My, how fast the tables can turn in politics. Huge scandals are now rocking the Obama administration. From Benghazi, the IRS attacking Tea Party folks, stealing millions of health records, the Justice Department hacking reporters' phone lines, and the EPA is now accused of showing favoritism towards liberal groups over conservatives. Joining us to wade through the muck is the Desert Sun's global economist, Morris Beschloss. Maury, we did a segment a couple of shows back. We talked about the curse of the second-term president. Things seem to be unraveling at a breathtaking pace right now.
Much more than I would have expected. We knew it was coming. If you recall, when George W. Bush started his second term, when he barely squeezed out a win over John Kerry, he had a press conference the first day, or he was on air, and he said, I'm going to use my political capital to really do more than I did in my first term. Well, unfortunately, it was all downhill from then. If you recall, he started with trying to restructure Social Security to develop private accounts, which absolutely blew up in his face because people don't want to bother with, especially now with the stock market having gone way down and coming back up. It's too turbulent for the average person to privately invest. Most people don't understand investment, so they're happy for the government to take Social Security programs of that nature. But that was just an example.
Clinton's second term?
Clinton's second term actually turned out better than his first term, but Clinton was very clever. He was a great politician. If you recall, right at the end of the first term is when his hanky-panky was developing, and then the House, of course, voted to impeach him. Now, a lot of people don't understand. Impeachment is like indictment in legal language. That means the House can impeach, but the Senate has to convict. There was no chance of a two-thirds vote in the Senate to convict him, to throw him out of the office. That wasn't going to happen, which, by the way, has never happened in American history. There has never been a conviction of a sitting president.
And I don't see that happening with this one either.
There's no chance. You know, Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was hated by both the abolitionists in the North and the rebels who were defeated in the South. So it looked like he was going to go out, but he won by one vote in the Senate, because getting two-thirds votes in the Senate, no matter what party's in power, is almost impossible.
Right. Even to get a majority in the Senate is very difficult these days.
Yeah, especially now with the basic 60 votes needed to really get through anything. You can actually hold off any kind of legislation. You need 60 votes to overcome it. So
let's get back to the scandal du jour, I guess we'll call it. The IRS scandal is probably the biggest one right now that's haunting the administration. Having to admit that hundreds of Tea Party groups were denied or slowed down in their ability to get their 501c3s and 501c4s, which are tax-exempt status, to raise money and do public commercials and things like that. So now you look at 2012, and it makes a little bit more sense because we were all a little bit surprised by what happened in the 2012 election. But now you look back and you realize, you know, the IRS is the most powerful police agency in the world.
Well, there were a number of factors that won it for Obama. I mean, first of all, you're right. The fact that they were able to intimidate, panic certain organizations. So
Jewish groups?
That was one. But any group that was being investigated realized they had nothing to fight back with, so they went along with it. But the interesting thing about it is that the first term you can get away with almost anything, because then if you certainly want to get everything is for re-election. The first term is for re-election. Once you get in there, then you know, the problems come out into the open. In this case, you had a problem hanging over. In the case of Benghazi, which was just beginning to, come to the public view. And if you recall, there was an absolute lie that was told. I mean, there was no question. You know,
about the video.
Yeah, you don't have to have an investigation on that. When Susan Rice, who was, by the way, tabbed to become the Secretary of State, and probably would have if she hadn't testified on 5 different Sunday talk shows, that it was that video of some inconsequential person.
Well, and she had the email scandal thing going on too.
Yeah, but that was so very obvious that that was a total lie, because they knew, they told her to say this because they figured this would hold out until after the election, which it did. And now there's no way they can deny the fact that they lied about this. So Benghazi is just going to keep hanging over. The IRS thing, Nixon used a little bit of that, but with him it was more of a threat of using the IRS. He never really used the IRS as a blunt weapon, the way Obama is doing.
And it's interesting you bring up Nixon, because if you look back, it took 2 years for the whole Nixon-Watergate scandal to unravel completely.
And within those 2 years, he won an election over McGovern by a landslide, both in popular votes and in electoral votes. So you're right. First of all, you didn't have the communication system that you have now. 24-hour news cycles,
the cable newses, the internet.
And you also had a greater sense of decency at that time. You know, if a Democrat felt there was something wrong with a person of his own party, he would only go so far to defend him. And the same thing goes for the Republicans. And you know what finally happened? Barry Goldwater, who was the elder statesman of the party, came in with 3 senators and said, "Mr. President, it's time for you to go." And to be very definitive, if you don't, you will be not only impeached, but you will be convicted, and you'll be the first president in the history of this country that was kicked out of office, and that'll be your legacy. That was all that Nixon had to hear.
And you've also got the administration now tapping into reporters' phone lines. I mean, that's a very, very serious charge.
Well, it's also the Associated Press may not be as far left as MSNBC, but it's pretty close. You know, 90% of the American media is definitely in the Obama camp.
Right.
And has been one of the reasons why he's had an easy go of it. They have protected him, they have supported him, they have directed their editorial staff to support him. I mean, I've made the statement, I'll make it again. The American media has become, by and large, the propaganda division of the White House. And the only thing I can compare it to was when I was a kid in Germany and read the Nazi newspapers. That's about as close as it has come to be so one-sided and not be objective about your reporting.
And back in Nazi Germany, where you grew up, there was no dissenting voice at all. There was zero, correct?
Well, they may have, yeah, there were a few dissenting voices. They were never heard from again.
Right, they didn't sing very long.
No, unfortunately.
So we look at the IRS situation, and we're talking about first they said it was a couple of groups. Now we know it's like 500 groups. The IRS is poised to take over and be the enforcer for the healthcare overhaul that happens at the end of the year. Is it time now to decide on maybe we should regulate the IRS or remove the IRS?
Look, to me, it's always been a matter of who's in charge. I think the American presidency is the most powerful job in the world, not only as far as its relationship with other nations and the fact that we are the richest nation despite our huge debt. We still have more power going than any 2 countries put together. However, having said that, the power that comes from this nation emanates from the White House, because you say, well, you know, you have a legislative and a judicial. They don't mean a darn thing. If a president is clever enough to do things, executive orders, there were more executive orders issued by Obama in his first term than all the other presidents put together.
Well, Congress holds the purse strings. if Boehner was a real leader, and if the congressional Republicans wanted to withhold funding for Obamacare, they could do it, couldn't they?
No, no. Theoretically, yes. Actually, no, because this man knows how to get around these things. Everything he's done is circumvented all the historical traditions of respect between the legislature, the Senate, the House, and the presidency. Obamacare is a great example. If you recall, when Scott Brown was elected, he said, I'm going to be the one to stop Obamacare, because he was going to be the 61st vote, not the 61 vote which was needed. He was going to be the vote to stop Obamacare. At that point, it had been approved in the House, sent to the Senate. They were supposed to be in conference to discuss it, and then go back to the Senate for the changes that were going to be made in the House. Pelosi came out, Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker of the House at that time,
with her big
said
hammer.
No. They basically, she said, we accept the Senate version. We don't have to go into conference. That threw everybody into a turmoil, but that is how Obamacare passed.
So what does this mean for the agenda, which was obviously seizing America's, confiscating our guns? Let's be honest about it. It's about getting guns out of the hands of Americans.
They'll never do it.
Illegal immigration reform.
Yeah. No, I think what's happened is, you see, again, the press doesn't talk about this. On March 31st, you had two basic stumbling blocks. First of all, you had the fiscal cliff, and they worked that out by the upper 2% paying higher taxes, and the upper 2% also paying another 3.8% to fund Obamacare. And that's only the beginning, by the way, for Obamacare for next year. But under those conditions, what you've had is now you had March 31st, you had sequestration, which meant if they couldn't come to an agreement, which they didn't, then there would have to be a cutback both in the military as well as the civilian agencies. They worked that out in something called a continuing resolution. The continuing resolution means we'll just keep going this way until the end of the fiscal year. That means the House and the Senate both have decided that they're going to accept whatever is done, and they'll do it informally. There hasn't been a word said about the debt. There hasn't been a word said about the deficit, and this is going to keep going for another 4.5 months.
And we're headed towards the end of the debt ceiling, where we're going to have to raise the debt ceiling again.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that I think was important in terms of this recent, I guess, scandal, we'll call these scandals, is that the left-wing media seems to be turning on the Obama administration. Do you sense that this is coming from somewhere inside the camp? Maybe Joe Biden, maybe the Clinton machine?
No. See, I don't see a conspiracy there. I see the press doesn't want to be on the Titanic when it sinks. That's the way I look at it. You know, the press.
So they see the ship going down.
Oh, they see, absolutely. They see things are happening. They've been backing Obama because he was backing them. He was playing favorites with TV stations, with newspapers. It was always the Washington Post, the New York Times, sometimes the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, always giving them favorite attention in the press conference or whatever. Well, now they begin to see the emperor has no clothes. You know, he's naked. I mean, he's now vulnerable. He's weak. And he's not coming across as the shining star that that everybody said he was going to be when he first came into office, all the people that backed him. So now they are looking out for their own interests. And suddenly you're seeing cracks in the wall. You're seeing the media saying, hey, wait a second. We're going to be around when he's out of there. He can make millions of dollars by just making speeches. But we have to make a living. We have to have advertising. That's what's happening.
We need to step away for a brief moment, and when we return, we'll have our economic news, global outlook, the latest in our history segment. If you'd like to email us with any questions or comments, or if you'd like any information regarding the show, just log on to our website, theworldreport.org. We'll be right back.